What's up, everybody? Doing a little live stream. Thanks for joining. Today, we're going to cover the whole... we got a good one. Got a damn good show, right? We're going to cover Antifa in Atlanta. It's not so much that Antifa, they bashed the windows out of 3 businesses, set a cop car on fire. It's not so much that. It's not so much one of their members took a shot at a cop as they were securing the cop city. They're getting ready to develop that into a training ground for the Atlanta police. It's not so much all of that. It's the way that social media, it's the way that mainstream media has either ignored this or tried to put this spin on it, where we're just basically changing the definition of what violence is. It's wild. It's like, oh, that's not really all that violent. I mean, setting a cop car on fire, that's not, bashing in. I mean, who cares about a few windows? We're literally going to read a statement from somebody who says, a few windows. How about we go to your house and, test the, glass at your home and then ask you, well, was that violent, or was that a mostly peaceful action where we took out all the windows in your home? All right, let's jump on into it. Before we jump in, let's look at the definition of violence, just so we have a baseline. Violence is behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. Something. Okay? Doesn't have to be a person. But with all this stuff going on, you're starting to see that definition change. Well, I mean, these mostly peaceful protesters, things got a little out of hand and a little out of control. But what they actually did, that's not really violence. I mean, they're expressing themselves. They're expressing themselves. What a bunch of nonsense. What a bunch of nonsense. When you bring rocks to a business front, this is on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. These are high rises. This is downtown Atlanta. This is their high rise territory. They're going in there intentionally to cause as much damage as they physically can. That's literally what they've got going on. All right. So let's jump on into breaking. Atlanta burns as Antifa riot after comrade shot dead by cop in autonomous zone gunfight. We're going to start off with post-millennial because you've got Andy No in there, and he's he knows all things Antifa. So we're going to start with post-millennial. On Saturday night, this past weekend, Antifa members took to the streets of Atlanta to throw rocks at and light fires outside of the Atlanta Police Foundation after the now suspended Atlanta Forest Twitter account called for a night of rage. So let's stop right there. So it's so interesting that on Twitter, the far left still has accounts, and yet other entities, slightly right of center, they've been cut off at the knees long ago, right? But you got a night of rage. What more do you need than that? And this is following the fatal shooting of one of their members, 26-year-old Manuel Esteban Pez Terran, who goes by a nickname. I forget what it is, starts with a T. We'll get to that too. But you know what I find so much of what I read here is like, these are kids. They get into these groups. They go down these roads. They've got nicknames. This guy happens to be non-binary. It's like they feel like they're playing a video game. Hey, let's live in tree forts in the forest outside Atlanta. Let's all go there. Because none of these kids, I think except for maybe one that had been arrested, are from actually Georgia. They're not locals. They're coming in from the outside. So, from my perspective, these kids are coming in, and by kids, I mean anybody under like 40, 45. These kids are live action role playing. They're LARPing at real life. And when you shoot at a cop, he's going to shoot back. And that's what happened in Atlanta. They were doing a sweep of this, the forest, the cop city is what they call it. They're doing a sweep of the forest. They found 25 different, little encampment areas. These people this is Antifa. They're hanging out in the forest. They're making tree forts. They've been there for months. Things that we have seen, things that I have podcasted here personally, the acts of violence that they have done that led up to this. They threw a Molotov cocktail at a police car. We've seen footage of that. They didn't throw it very far. They didn't throw it very well. It hit a fence and fell wildly short. They burned a couple of homes that were under construction in the area down to the foundation. Just burned. They burned a dude's truck with him almost in it. The guy was like, yeah, it seemed like they wanted to burn it with me in it. I mean, he was there picking up scrap metal or something. The whole thing's just, a little sketchy. And they took a shot at a police officer and the police officer shot back. I mean, it kind of seems like these guys think that they're playing a game, but then when real life, erupts as it does, you take a shot at a cop, they shoot back. They shoot back. And you know what? There's no reset button on the video game. It's all said and done. So then Antifa just got real worked up because, one of their members who, remember, this is still a myth. Antifa is still a myth. And, it's this loose collaboration of people. There's no real leadership. I think that's all nonsense. They only go to that when something like this happens so that they can say, well, there's really nobody that's in charge here. It's all just a bunch of individuals. We're a collective voice that somehow gets a couple hundred people all at once into downtown Atlanta. The post-millennial editor-at-large, Andy No, tweeted, breaking, far-left extremists and Antifa gathering for revenge against law enforcement in Atlanta over the killing of their gunman at their autonomous zone, smashed up businesses and set an Atlanta police vehicle on fire. So let's go back to the actual shooting itself. So you've got this 26-year-old kid in the forest. The police are coming through saying, hey, we need you to clear out. And the guy takes a shot at a cop and hits him. The guy's been in surgery. The police officer's been in surgery. So we know that to be a fact. And then the shooter was just immediately taken out. I mean, just that's kind of what happens. So what happened there? What happened there? Did this kid just, from all accounts, he seemed like a really nice kid. I know you're going to hate me for saying that, but all the stuff that I read, it did not sound like he was a hardened Antifa member. From Panama, his mom's in Panama City. His mom is under the impression that, this is just some nice environmentalists living in the trees. And that's the bottom line here is these are not nice environmentalists, living in the trees. These people have gasoline. They have to make bombs. They've got, guns. Clearly somebody brought a gun across state lines, took a shot at a cop. We know that because that is literally what's happened here. So you got a situation where the media is trying to spin it and you just can't really spin this. You can't spin it. And yet you can spin it with absolute lies. And that's the way it seems to me that this is going. And we're going to find that out before this podcast is over. So this one's probably I'm guessing we'll go for like 45 minutes here, something like that. And then I'm also going to talk about the whole, Steven Crowder deal. Yeah. Steven Crowder. Yeah. I mean, he's just, Steven Crowder versus the Daily Wire. Stop Big Con. I know a few folks want to hear about that. I'm not going to do a separate segment on that, but I'll just weigh in on what I think there. So a white female arrested at the violent attack in the Atlanta Police Foundation tries to pull a George Floyd by shouting, "I can't breathe," when she was standing. The far left extremists gathered for a revenge riot. It was a revenge riot. It wasn't a very good one, and it wasn't a very big one. You know why? Because the Atlanta police basically came in and stopped it in its tracks. They let them go for as long as they actually were peaceful, as long as they were actually going down the street. But the minute they diverged into that, cops took over and they arrested them. So we've got footage here. Let's check out this footage just super quick. This is always entertaining, right? Here we go.
Are you okay?
Oh, pants almost fell off.
Get out the street!
Got it? Will do.
I
All right, so that's, you get a little idea of what we're dealing with. Standard Antifa, just, trying to mix things up. Here's another video. Let's take a look at this one.
AR style rifles. Burning cop car. Got police with the rifles. Yeah, I thought. Police with AR style rifles.
Sorry, I missed the cam on the first one. Let's go back. Actually, you guys don't. You guys can look that up and see the. Let's show the Antifa member. Let's just show the Antifa member.
Are you okay?
Get out in the street! Got it? Will do.
So yeah, we've got just our regular shenanigans from Antifa, with the exception of they just had one of their members killed because they were playing treehouse in the forest. And what are they really expecting to get out of that? Like, you're gonna go protest in the forest, and I see their signs, but you know what's interesting is this training center is exactly what they asked for in 2020. We need police reform. Well, you've got to have police reform at a training center. That's how this works. So they're building a $90 million training center. This is where the police training is going to happen. And yet they don't want to have this police training center because it's going to take down the trees. I mean, it's wildly ridiculous is what it is. It's wildly ridiculous. We've got scenes of just, fire and crazy stuff going on. Let's see what else. Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, we're going to listen to this because
many of them don't even live in Atlanta or in the state of Georgia, and they don't represent the voices of Atlanta. And some of them were found with explosives on them. You heard that correctly, explosive, and that has led to a police officer's car being set on fire, and other destruction has occurred. And so, make no mistake about it, these individuals meant harm to people and to property. And so
So that's the mayor coming right out and saying, hey, these people caused violence, period. It just did. I mean, we can see it. And what's interesting is you got a red governor there. It's a massive difference between Portland with a Democratic governor and a Democrat mayor. You've got a Republican governor, and you've got I don't know if this mayor, I'm going to say he's probably a Democrat, but he campaigned on a hard stance on crime because everybody knows things in Atlanta are not exactly as peaceful as maybe some other cities. So you've got a situation where people are dropping the hammer on criminal activity. We've got this Cop City going in, which is a massive training center, trying to get some of this going. You got these, tree huggers from Antifa jumping in and going, we can't kill the forest. We got stuff going on. So Manuel Esteban Pez Terran was killed by police after he allegedly shot an officer who was part of an operation clearing out the Antifa-occupied autonomous zone dubbed Cop City, where the Atlanta Police Department training facility is set to be built. Our officers are on high alert and will continue our work to keep the streets safe for our residents, businesses, and visitors alike, Atlanta police said in a statement. That's the major difference between Portland and Georgia. Georgia is taking care of business. This is domestic terrorism. They've already arrested a number of these individuals. I think we arrested 5, maybe a week ago or so. I podcasted on that. They charged him with domestic terrorism. And then we've got a number of charges since then. I think 6 people have been charged with domestic terrorism. So, we're going down that road. There's some more stuff here, but let's jump into CNN guest who defended Atlanta's violent protests promoted GoFundMe for alleged cop shooter. You're gonna like this footage. This footage is entertaining.
Construction violence. To some people, it certainly is. But this idea that breaking windows or other acts of property destruction are the same as actual violence against humans it's kind of a dangerous and slippery concept. And look, I don't think this is a smart move. I don't think it's a productive move from the standpoint of the protesters. But as even the chief himself said, this is a small group. This is also within this Defend the Forest movement. There are no leaders, so people go off and do their own things. That doesn't just make them justifiable, but I do think that you keep using these words violent, and it gives the impression. The only violence or the only acts of violence against people that I saw were actually police tackling protesters.
Really? Police tackling protesters? Well, that's one way to see it. But as we read the definition earlier, things count too. So this is literally who CNN brought on to kind of explain what's going on. Just some dipshit who didn't really know what he was talking about. And social media users discovered that David Pisner, the freelance journalist who suggested on CNN that Antifa wasn't using violence during the Atlanta riots, supported the violent protester at the center of the uproar. Pisner originally faced intense online backlash after claiming that the fiery uproar seen in Atlanta over the weekend does not necessarily prove that Antifa members are violent. What? Okay. All right. Well, you keep using these words, violent. The only acts of violence against people that I saw were actually police tackling protesters. And it's kind of like saying, well, the only acts I saw were a policeman shooting, said individual. And if you only give that context and you don't say who shot at them first, then you've just got this wildly out of context series of events that you're posing as facts, which is the policeman tackled these individuals after they committed crimes. And that's kind of what the police do. That's just how this goes. That's life. Let's keep going here. And I'll read some of this and I'll show you guys some of this as you want it. All right, here's a picture of the guy. Here's a picture of our poor guy. He's dead. I think this kid got sucked in. I'm not trying to make excuses for anybody joining Antifa, but unfortunately, Antifa is comprised of individuals who are at the margins of society. They are, for the most part, they're outliers. They are people who don't fit in elsewhere, and they somehow get, caught up in this stuff, and then they go down these roads. Sometimes they have their lives ended. And from that standpoint, from a parental standpoint, I'm just like, man, these people only knew what they're getting into. And part of the reason, we can go down this road, and I'm going to switch to this real quick, is that here's how CNN tries to spin it. Oh, these were harmless activists. We're going to read this one super quick. Mother activist fatally shot by law enforcement at Atlanta police training facility says she feels angry and powerless. Well, because she is. She's down in Panama City. Her kid just got killed. And the activist 26-year-old Manuel was shot near a planned 90 million. We know all about that. Officers spotted someone in a tent in the woods and gave verbal commands, but the person allegedly did not comply and shot a Georgia State Patrol trooper. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation said in a news release, officers returned fire and fatally wounded the person, who was identified as Tehran. A handgun recovered from the individual's possession matched the projectile from the trooper's wound. All right. So the only real question is who shot first? And there's no body cam footage. They don't have body cams. And they basically came right out and said that. So, we're going to have to rely upon the testimony of the police. Activists are going to say, we don't believe them at all. Here, the mom said, they said he had a gun. If he had one, it was for protecting himself against the animals in the forest. This is that kid's mom. This is what she's been told. She doesn't know what the forest in Atlanta looks like. I mean, are you going to have some deer come up and nibble you? Are there black bears in the Atlanta forest? I don't know what's in the forest, but guess what? You don't use a handgun against any of those predatory animals. Use a handgun for shooting another human being. That's reasonable, right? That's what I understand, she said. I never knew he had a gun, the mother continued, adding that she didn't think Tehran was the type of person to fire at law enforcement. So what happened here? Did the kid freak out? Possibly. Did he want to make a statement? Hey, I've, never really done anything in my life, and these people all tell me that this is a cause worth fighting for. We got to fight against the oppressive police system and development of this site. We got to save this forest, which is literally just city-owned property with trees on it. So, okay. Activists associated with protesting the facility also disputed law enforcement's account, calling Tehran a forest defender, working to fight environmental racism. Environmental racism. Okay. All right. They said Tehran identified as non-binary and he was a sweet, warm, very smart and caring person. And unfortunately now he is no longer with us because he followed these people down a line of thinking, a line of reasoning, and a line of action, and he is dead. So he was not a violent person. He was a pacifist. But if he did take that first shot at the cops, which I have no reason to believe he didn't, then he's a pacifist who took a shot at a cop. And that's not going to, F around and find out. It's not going to go well, right? Life is not live action role playing. It's real. And the consequences are one time, done. And that's unfortunately where this young man ended up. I'm sorry. He's non-binary. I misgendered him. He's non-gender, non-binary. I don't even know. I don't even know what to say about any of this stuff anymore. Tehran didn't express any concerns about personal safety over the roughly 6 months spent with other activists near the proposed police training facility, the mother said. Well, if you followed any of the news stories, you would know that they weren't singing Kumbaya in the forest. There's tons of footage out there of exactly what they've been up to. And it has not been tending to the ferns in the forest. No. They're harassing people. They're harassing cops. They're, shooting ball bearings from wrist rockets at cops. They've got explosives. We've got explosives. He didn't think it would escalate. I would tell him to be careful, but he would tell me that he was safe, she said. Well, a lot of people at CHOP felt they were safe too, right? 2 kids got killed there, didn't they? 19 and 16, right? So safe is kind of a relative concept. The Atlanta Police Foundation has said the planned training center, dubbed Cop City by its opponents, is needed to help boost morale and recruitment efforts. But the facility, which will include a shooting range, mock city, and burn building, has been met with intense resistance. Has it, though? Has it really been met with intense resistance? We've got a bunch of these Antifa folks out there doing their little protest thing. But, it's kind of like when Mayor Durkin here in Seattle decided, you know what? Summer of love is over. Chop/Chaz, it's over. Boom, done, gone. And you had a couple hundred police officers from Seattle just march through and clear it out. I mean, it took a couple of hours. And this is a much larger area here that we're talking about. You're talking about acres and acres and acres of forest. I think it is 85 acres of forested area that they're going to develop. They're well within their right to develop it. That's what you do. This is what happens. You wanted the training, you wanted the reform, and reform comes in the shape of training. This is a training center. This is exactly what you wanted. And now you're protesting because of, and then claiming it's not violent. It's wild. I'm sorry for the people who are angry, but I don't want to be angry all my life. That's how the mom kind of says it. She also says, I don't think violence is going to do anything, she said, telling protesters in Atlanta, do not throw stones. We need to walk together with candles. This mom is wildly out of touch with exactly what's going on. Wildly out. She lives in Panama City. She doesn't live anywhere remotely close to Atlanta, Georgia. So she's been fed this stuff, and I'm sure, Antifa's reached out to her and said, hey, say this stuff. We're going to go down these roads. We're going to talk about this stuff. And it's not going well, right? It's not going well. So I need to make sure that we don't have craziness going on here on the screen. Sometimes craziness just pops up and bites me right in the butt. Okay, so we are still there. Okay, so we're gonna go back. So protesters instigated a night of chaos upon the news that Tehran was killed by the police after he allegedly refused to listen to demands from authorities. So they went into the forest. They said, hey, put your gun down. Need you to leave. Need you to come out. They're basically doing a sweep, right? They're getting ready to develop this thing. He didn't. So we're not hearing a lot about that, are we? We're not hearing much about that at all. His nickname is Totagita. It's called Little Turtle. Little Turtle. All right. So what began as a peaceful protest spiraled into several hours of destruction. And it looked like basically a couple of banks got hit, some businesses got hit, police car got rocked and basically got set on fire. I mean, the fact that it didn't devolve into much more than that, I think is a testimony to leadership within the city. They jumped on it. They had cops there and they just jumped on it and said, yeah, we're not doing this. We're going to arrest you. We're going to, do what we need to. And the mayor is coming right out. And like I said earlier, so different than Portland. The mayor is coming out and saying, he's not standing out there with a photo op like Mayor Ted did, right? He's not doing that. He's doing a press conference and he's denouncing it and saying, hey, this is domestic violence. Not domestic violence, domestic terrorism. This is terrorism. So yeah, there we go. All right, let's go to the next CNN article. All right, let's take a peek at that. Charges announced for those arrested in protests over controversial Cop City and fatal police shooting of activists. Got a little video of they're watching the police thing burn, but how many times do you want to watch a cop car burn? It's just annoying to me. Police have released the charges for the 6 people who were arrested Saturday evening in downtown Atlanta, authorities said, during protests that came in response to a proposed police training facility in the fatal police shooting. Okay. They each face 4 felony charges: domestic terrorism, arson in the first degree, criminal damage in the second degree, and interference with government property, according to police. Each of the suspects, who range from 20 to 37 years, is also facing 4 misdemeanor charges. Good. The more, the merrier. More is better, including unlawful assembly, police said. They didn't pull a permit. One of the arrested protesters is from Georgia, according to police. The others are from Tennessee, Washington. We've got a woman from Spokane, Washington in there. Huh. Yeah. Let's talk about that for a second. Isn't it interesting how none of these folks are ever local? They come in on these caravans. They bring their ambulance. They're basically self-sufficient from the whole standpoint of they just come in into an area, and they've been living in the forest in Atlanta for months. This is nothing new. It's just that you haven't heard much about it in mainstream media. And now that this is spilling over, we're going to hear it as, well, I mean, they're trying to save the forest, and, windows and police cars and buildings it's not really violence. And kumbaya. I mean, the spin on this is just, to me, it's the spin that is, it's not shocking, but you're like, you're just lying to me. You are literally lying to me. You're trying to change a definition so that you can lie to me and say that this wasn't something, more than it already was. One of the arrested protesters is from Georgia, according to police. The other is Tennessee, Washington, Maine, and Michigan. Protesters come in response to a planned $90,085,000. We've talked about that. CNN reported earlier Sunday that Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens said none of the arrested protesters were from Georgia. He's spitting out information as he's got it. I think he's done an okay job at getting the information out there. Dickens was among the city council members who voted in favor of the training center in 2021. So you've got support in Georgia. You've got support in Georgia for law enforcement. Wildly different than shenanigans here in Oregon, right? Wildly different than the mayor out there, all chummy and just, let's have the summer of love, like Jenny Durkin said. It was peaceful. Here's what the mayor is saying. It was peaceful, but there were some individuals within that crowd that meant violence, Dickens said. And if you mean peaceful from like the very beginning of the march, but that's how this always goes. They don't start off by bashing in windows. They don't start off doing that at all. They wait a while. So everybody can get some footage of the mostly peaceful protest. And then a couple hours into it, hour into it, 45 minutes into it, depending on how much, police following presence they have, how they feel like they can get away with it. Because I was here at some protests in Bellevue and police were literally up their ass here in Bellevue. I mean, not far away. Like the protesters, Antifa was screaming about the fact that the brake pads on the police cars and the brake pads on the bikes of the police officers were annoying them as they were protesting, as they were marching down the street. So if you go right up somebody's rear end and you're just like right on top of them, doesn't leave them a lot of opportunity. Whereas down in Portland, Mayor Ted's like, it's all great. You guys just protest as much as you want, mostly peaceful. So the mayor of Atlanta goes, we love to support people when they're doing right. Peaceful protests are part of the American freedoms. But when you are violent, we will make sure that you get held accountable. Interesting. Actual accountability for violence, domestic terrorism. Yeah, this is the road we're going down. So wild that it comes down to this. And here's what I wanted to point out here. Have you take a peek at this. Peaceful protest turns violent. That is the headline. So anybody skimming through this who doesn't see the context, this is what they're going to see. Peaceful protest turns violent. Protesters marched in a peaceful manner, quote, down a central Atlanta street, but a group within the crowd later began committing illegal acts, including breaking windows and attacking police cruisers. Atlanta police chief said, police are continuing to investigate whether there are any others involved in illegal activity, the chief said. 3 businesses suffered damage to their windows. Social media footage showed a police cruiser on fire. We talked about that. Yeah, we've got this whole defend the Atlanta forest movement, which opposes the facility. All right. They just want to oppose everything. Antifa just wants to oppose everything to do with the police. And so even though this is exactly what Black Lives Matter and Antifa were demanding, which was police reform, on top of abolishing the police, whichever one you wanted, defund the police, abolish the whole court system, abolish, judicial system, abolish the Supreme Court, just abolish everything. Anti-fascist. Get rid of everything that is in your way. And we'll see how that works out. Because a world without, laws and world without any kind of, police activity, yeah, we refer to that as Mad Max, don't we? Because that's what you've got. We refer to that as escape from New York territory. All right, send him there. There's 0 laws there. We'll just see how he does there. We'll just, guy's going to act that way, send him there. But in Atlanta, yeah, they're going to go after folks. And the police have said as much, the mayor has said as much, and the governor has consistently dropped the hammer. He's like, yeah, we're in Kemp. Yeah, we're not dealing with that. you guys are going to have to take your silliness elsewhere. I'm surprised. I'm surprised they tried to do this in Atlanta. I mean, just, pick a state. This probably wouldn't be one. Georgia, I'd just be like, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think that's probably our right opportunity. How about we wait? How about we wait till Washington State becomes, open again? Let's go back to California. Surprised more of this hasn't happened in California, right? I mean, Newsom would just embrace it. He'd be like, oh, come on in, guys. We'll give you water. We'll give you food. You guys need any tents? Need a new van? You guys need a new ambulance? That was one of the things I saw down in Portland. I was like, these guys even have their own ambulance. This is weird. It's wild that this is what we got going on. All right. I think that's it for this one. Oh, yeah. Here we go. Slain activist mother feels angry and powerless. This is between that headline. I'll show you that one. Between this headline here, slain activist mother feels angry and powerless, combined with this one here, peaceful protest turns violent. If you only read those two headlines, those two sub headlines within this article, you'd walk away with it for your next cocktail party thinking that, oh, those guys got screwed. That kid that got killed, that was terrible. He was defending the forest. He was hugging a tree with one arm, and the other arm he had on his firearm that he carried across state lines and shot at a police officer with. But don't mind that. Other than that, it wasn't violent. It was mostly peaceful. And the authorities will not identify the trooper. That's the next subsection, a controversial facility. So these are ways that CNN and the mainstream media are trying to spin this as, oh, that poor young man, he lost his life, hugging a tree. He's in a tree fort. These guys, they have literally come right out, and I believe they've got some kind of speaker that is coming, that is at these events, and he is speaking because he's pretty well spoken, and he's got his arguments lined up. And if you listen to his arguments without any context, you'd go, oh, well, these guys they just, they love the environment. We love the environment, so we're going to be behind these. And what you don't see is them lobbing Molotov cocktails, trying to basically throw a bomb at police officers and kill them. You don't see them doing that. You don't see him, taking the first shot at the cop. You don't see him in a shootout with the police under, what they're claiming are mostly peaceful circumstances. So, you see an article like this and you're like, oh my word, but this is nothing new, is it? So let's talk about the controversial facility for just a second. The Atlanta Police Foundation has said the planned training center is needed. Okay, we knew that. Well, some critics of the project see it as a response to the 2020 police brutality and racial injustice protests. City leaders have said that the center will also help address police reform, but have not provided further details. Well, at what point, this thing they haven't even broken ground yet. And you're already up their rear end for, they haven't given us details on how the reform's going to go. You got to build it first, because apparently their existing center is, it's not going to do the job. It's not going to do the job. And so leadership is determined, hey, we want some reform. We need new training. We need more cops. This is the road we're going down, because everybody kind of within the whole Georgia system is like, more police needed, fewer police, hard no-go. We've seen how that goes. We've seen the dealio when you defund the police, and they've already got enough, battle. They've got enough battle fighting the crime that they've got on hand. So they need some more cops. And activists have also long expressed concern over the project's environmental impact. How about when you guys try and light the forest on fire? How about that environmental impact? What about that? I mean, that's not good for the forest, is it? The training center would carve out a chunk of forested land so it doesn't decimate it. Clears the area that needs to be cleared and fragment what local advocates hope will become a network of connected green spaces across parts of Atlanta and DeKalb County. These people are hopelessly ideological. And, they're misconstrued. There's just like, oh, we're going to go after this. We really think that we're going to have an impact with the whole cop center being developed. They're just not. That's not how this works. It's not going to happen. We've got a methadone clinic or, opioid drug treatment center going up in Linwood that's basically next door to a boys and girls club, an after school, sports center for kids. Activists there, the protesters there who are basically community members, they're having some good luck because they're basically stating, hey, here's the reason this isn't good for the community. Here's what we're thinking. And they're marching doing that. But you've got Antifa here who doesn't really have a logical reasoning for why the center should go in. They just want to go down there and create some mayhem, which they've done. Now they're being arrested. And mainstream media is saying, well, we need to look at the definition of violence because cracking out windows, that's not really all that violent. Yeah. What do you even say to that? Yeah, it's ridiculous. All right. So we talked about the mother of the activists. I feel bad for that woman. It's probably coming out of nowhere. Her kid's non-binary. Then all of a sudden, she probably knew that, but then all of a sudden her kid's dead. And she's like, what happened? One minute he's, living in the forest and I'm telling him I hope he's okay. Next minute he's dead. That's how that happens. So, if you got a kid, you got a grandkid, you got whatever, getting involved in one of these groups, it's a slippery slope. This goes sideways. Ask the parents who had their kids' lives taken at CHOP because there was this idea that I won't get caught. If I shoot somebody else, I won't get caught. There's no cops around. Ask those parents how they're feeling now. It's not pretty. It is not. It's, not good. All right. Let's go to the New York Post for our last article here. New York Post has always got just kind of the lowdown. You're like, Daily Mail sometimes too. Fox. Let's read this one. Let's see what we got going on. Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens labels anti-police riots domestic terrorism. Good. Absolutely good. Somebody's calling it the way that it needs to be. So this is from a little bit of that video I showed earlier when he just basically comes out and says it. Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens on Sunday denied reports that the widespread protests seen there were peaceful. Good. He's calling it the way it is. And said that 6 people who allegedly traveled into the city with explosives will face domestic terrorism charges. Good, because that's what it is. That's what all that shenanigans during the summer of 2020 should have been. Domestic terrorism charges. You know what? Trump said as much. I'm not a huge Trump fanboy, but I voted for him twice. And you know what he said was, that's domestic terrorism. What are they doing? And everybody's like, they're peaceful. They're mostly peaceful protesters. What are you talking about? And then Trump said, hey, if you can't take care of your own city, we'll do it for you. We'll do it for you. And everybody just freaked out. That's when I ran down to Portland because I was like, this is weird. What's going on here? Dickens gave an update on the destructive Saturday night protest that followed the fatal shooting of a 26-year-old while speaking on a panel discussing crime in American cities on CBS Face the Nation. That's why this was kind of important. He basically told the nation, hey, here's the deal. Here's what you got going on. And it's not this peaceful thing that you're seeing on CNN. Activist Manuel Esteban, okay, we know, was shot and killed. Cut out that long. That was terrible, wasn't it? Tehran was asked to move out of the woods, and then he was shot, fatally shot. Tehran's death has sparked a wave of destructive protests across the city. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. They had another one in Michigan, had a couple other notable ones elsewhere, but for the most part, they were physically on top of most of that stuff. So not a ton else there. The Democratic mayor, okay, he is mayor of Atlanta's Democratic mayor, but he's a hardliner on law and order, right? Noted the protests had started out peacefully, but were thrown off track by a group of 6 people. It only takes 6, right? That's how this always goes, right? That's always, we'll keep reading there, but that's how this always goes. There's a small subgroup so that the whole group doesn't get arrested. There's a small subgroup that gets in there if you Google some of the footage, I think one of the Atlanta stations has some really good footage of these members of Antifa throwing rocks at the windows. And what was so interesting and entertaining for me is both of my boys played baseball. Both of them were pitchers at one time. They taught the kids how to throw. And let's just say that none of these members of Antifa knew how to throw. The rocks would come bouncing back at them. Literally in this footage, you got all this chaos and mayhem going on. These kids are throwing rocks at the window and it's coming bouncing back at them, and pick up the rock and throw it again. And they just don't have any velocity. They're taught to wind up. They weren't taught to put their core into it because they never played sports. Right? I mean, these are rejects. So Dickens said the violence stopped once those 6 individuals were arrested, adding, "It should be noted that these individuals were not Atlanta or Georgia residents." I think one of them was. Those who were arrested will face a variety of charges. We talked about that. Most of them traveled into our city to wreak havoc. And so we love to support people when they're doing right. Peaceful protest is part of the American. We've read about that. But when you're violent, we'll make sure that you get held accountable. I am all for that. And could you imagine if this was the Proud Boys doing this stuff? Could you imagine the outrage? I bet you I'm one of the few podcasters right now live streaming this. You know why? Because all the other big guys have pretty much put out a post over the weekend or whatever. And there's only a handful of us doing this kind of thing. There's only a handful of conservative media. And by conservative, that means middle of the road. And you just don't have any coverage of this kind of thing because you just don't. There's not that many people talking about it. And so when I bring this up with friends, family, you know what I get most of the time? And they're like, "What's that? What happened? What do you mean? What do you mean there was something down in Atlanta? Oh, there's Cop City and they're living in tree forts and running around burning houses down to the foundation, taking people's trucks and burning them up and trying to set the forest on fire." And people just look at me like I'm just from another planet. No, this is happening in a, area outside of Atlanta. They're going to build this big police complex and they've called it Cop City. And people are like, "What are you talking about?" Could you imagine if the Proud Boys in that forest and they were protesting? I don't know. What would they be protesting? Whatever. Oh, CNN would be all over it. They would have a news bite for every little thing. You were the lead Proud Boys librarian in the 2nd grade. Tell us what his actions were like. Was he an abusive person back then, as we've seen his actions in the forest as well? What can you tell us about this individual at age 8, even though he's now age 32? It would be one of those things, right? But instead, it's crickets. You got crickets. And when you go to Google and you Google Atlanta Antifa, you get very few stories. Interesting, right? I mean, very few stories. It's wild. This stuff is, I don't want to say being shadow banned, but it is certainly not being pushed out there. These stories are being repressed because it doesn't look good. Doesn't make the far left look good at all. And everybody always wants to talk about the far right. And I'm not a huge Proud Boys fan. I'm not a huge Patriot Prayer fan. I'm also not a huge Antifa fan. You know what I mean? I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm a business guy just trying to do business and occasionally podcast, 15 times a week. But, this is some crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff that is not being covered. And you know what's also really interesting and at the same time also very weird? The number of folks who watch Fox versus the number of people who watch CNN. But I think people who consume only CNN, they skip through these articles, they skip through these headlines to the point where they don't really know what they're talking about. And they want the Reader's Digest version. Just tell us what happened. Well, I mean, there were some mostly peaceful protesters in the forest and they got into it. And the abusive aggressive police came in there. And so the guy in the forest had to defend himself by, shooting a cop, and now he's dead. So all of his comrades, they got together and had a night of terror that they announced on Twitter. And, they, hurled rocks against businesses in downtown Atlanta, broke windows and set a cop car on fire, and 6 of them got arrested. And yet that story there's very minimal out there. So that's about as much as I know on this topic. This is an ongoing, developing story. Guaranteed you'll have some more. You'll have some more riots. We also had all those other mass shootings, right? I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a focus on the California shooting. And I know there was another shooting. I can't remember where. You're going to see the emphasis on that. Look over here. Not so much over here, but over here. And this is what we'll go with. This is what we're going to talk about because, these shootings, it's wild stuff, right? It's wild stuff. All right. So that's it for that segment. I am now going to talk about, so if you guys want to hear me talk about Steven Crowder versus, the Daily Wire, this is also a topic that has come up, and it's massively huge in the conservative space. And I spent a lot of this past weekend analyzing all the different videos, not from the standpoint of who's right and who's wrong, but there is so much information out there. And that's what I'm going to talk about. What's wild about this story is that the conservative voices are literally transparent to the point where they read the contracts. Steven Crowder talked a little bit about his contract that he was offered. Let's start right there. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, Steven Crowder was offered a contract for $50 million for 4 years, 50 big ones for 4 with another 25 for 2, meaning 75 million for 6 years. And you might say, good Lord, I will do anything for that kind of money. Here's what you're not asking is, how much traffic does he drive in? How big is Steven Crowder? This was an offer. This was a term sheet offer, non-binding, from the Daily Wire. Okay. Who he's worked with before. Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring, I believe it is. 2 main principals there. Well, Jeremy gave Steven Crowder a non-binding term sheet, which is it's like an offer. It's like a lowball offer in a real estate contract. You throw it out there. And Steven Crowder took a few months and then basically just recently said that this is big conservative, for whatever that is, because basically you got Fox News and you've got the Daily Wire. And those are your only major monstrous entities kind of in this space, in this playing field. But Steven Crowder has about 6 million subscribers on YouTube. And you might say, well, he's been demonetized from there. He has, but he drives traffic from YouTube to his mug club and to his private subscription services, right? So you're talking 75 million for 6 years based on a 4-year with a 2-year add-on term to that. And in that contract, in that term sheet, non-binding term sheet, it broke down all the stuff. Like, so if you get your show, say, News for Reasonable People gets demonetized on Facebook, gets demonetized on, for doing something, and the profits of the company producing the show go down, you as the creator also have your profits go down, meaning your income. So, but when I was watching it from Steven Crowder's end of things, he was basically trying to say that big conservative business was cutting him off at the knees and was basically taking the little guy. And he talked a lot about the young up and coming conservative political figures, conservative people in social media. And he's like, don't sign these contracts. And I would agree. I'd say, don't sign a contract without an attorney. I spend all day, or I used to spend all day every day. I spend most of my time doing this stuff now, but reviewing contracts, real estate contracts, real estate agents, real estate brokers, they are basically acting as an attorney for their buyers, for their sellers, whatever it is. So I, spend all day, have done that in the past. I do a little bit of that now, not as much as I used to, but I can go through a contract pretty quick. And you know who you need? You need an attorney who specializes in that. Because if you don't know what you're looking at, you can get blindsided 100 different ways from Sunday. And if you're a young kid who's never signed a contract, you haven't been in business the last 40 years like I have, my first pay stub goes back to 1983. And I was just notified of that from LinkedIn. That's when I started working for one of my dad's companies. And I just had my 40th anniversary on LinkedIn. No wonder I'm not, crazy about real estate anymore. I'm off to something else because that's a pretty long career. I don't care who you are. So that's why I'm kind of transitioning. But if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know what you're talking about. See, all these folks in this space are basically, nobody owns the business. The only guy that owns a business that is producing on this scale is Tim Pool. And I know you guys don't like Tim Pool. He's too young. He talks about, World of Warcraft, and he talks about stuff that you guys as a whole don't identify with. You'd rather see the crazy real estate guy give a perspective, because I've had children, I've run businesses, I've had businesses I've almost lost, I've had houses that I've lost, I've had a marriage that went sideways, I've gone through a divorce during the Great Recession. I've made it through all that. I've got that perspective. So I can talk to a lot of you in a way that, is a little bit more credible. But in this space, Tim Pool is probably the most credible because he knows all of those players, and he knows all of those players very well. And he basically came out and said, Steven Crowder recorded a phone call with Jeremy from the company that offered him the Daily Wire. He recorded a phone call and he released that, and it didn't look good. Steven Crowder is trying to ramp up, I think, his own entity. And he's got the pull. He's got the 6 million followers on YouTube, and he's got the Mug Club, but he's never run a business. He actually talked about that, scaling up his business to meet the demands of what he's talking about doing, which is not just one performer like you're watching me right now. I'm one guy. We got one setup here. You want to talk about going to a Daily Wire setup? You've got multiple setups. Even with Tim Pool, I watch a lot of his video, his in-house video where he's talking to members of, that live in a house or work in the house, whatever. And those guys all have these jobs. He's got a big crew. All the shorts that need to be created from the longer form content, from the live stream, from the chicken house live streams. He's got all that stuff. Steven Crowder has never produced that. And the 50 for 4 and the 25 for 2, those are Steven Crowder not putting a dime into production. That's straight income to Steven Crowder. So what does Steven Crowder make? Is this really is this an insult? Is this a massive insult to Steven Crowder? I don't know, because I don't have those numbers to peruse. I don't know what those numbers look like. Maybe it is. But I also think there was also somebody else that was interviewing Brian Callahan. He's a podcaster and he's a comedian. He was being interviewed by Infotainment, I think it was, who I don't really know. I'm late to the game on a lot of this stuff. I don't even know who half of these people are because I'm so busy just doing my thing, figuring out what you guys want to hear, trying to bring that to you, trying to bring you live streams that are entertaining. I'm just trying to figure out which way is up, because I just spent literally the last 40 years of my life with my head up my ass in real estate. And now I'm transitioning out and doing an okay job of it. But what I have is I have the ability to self-fund. So I've done all those things that Steven Crowder's already done. I've done all those things that Tim Pool has already done because I'm able to self-fund. I don't have to go out and look for advertisers. I don't have to go out because I'm of a certain age where I was able to hold enough crumbs together from the Great Recession and my divorce to get to a point where I'm like, all right, we're going to buy that equipment. We're going to do this. We're going to fund this, because there's all kinds of stuff that we're constantly funding that is not necessarily cheap stuff. Because this is not a cheap show to put on. News for Reasonable People is thousands and thousands of dollars on a monthly basis, which pales in comparison to the Daily Wire's budget, which pales in comparison to Steven Crowder's budget at The Blaze, because he's just fully being produced by, The Blaze. And even though he's been demonetized on YouTube and he constantly talks about that, he is so good at driving traffic. And that's exactly what I've done. I am now driving traffic to my subscription service. A lot of that is because I am not able to show the content that I want to show on mainstream media because they view it as problematic, troublesome, violation of terms of service, violence. Can't have that. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, but this is the news story. I'm literally reading the news and you guys are demonetizing me. You're censoring me. So that's why I did the whole subscription thing. And to get away from the influence of big social media in any form, shape, whatever. That's why you don't see advertisements other than what YouTube sticks on. I haven't taken on any of those because then you are dependent upon those entities to basically, for lack of a better term, you suck on their, what. That's what it is, right? And Steven Crowder is talking about if he went down the Daily Wire route, they're going to have 5 or 6 commercials per episode. And let's talk about his workload there for a second, right? It's going to be 192 episodes a day. A year. 365 days in the year. 260 days on average are what most people work, I think. That's with 4 weeks of vacation and a whole bunch of time off for Steven Crowder to go do his stand-up comedy. That's what he likes to do. It's like Joe Rogan doing a stand-up comedy. What the F does that guy need to do stand-up comedy? It's at the core of what he does. Kind of like real estate for me. It's at the core of what I do, and I'll never leave it behind, but it'll become less and less important. But you always want to have it in your corner because that's what you started with, and that's what you're probably decent at. Some would say that Rogan's a better podcaster than he is comedian. I don't go out of my way to watch Rogan as a comedian. I think he is funny, but I think he is far funnier on his podcast, and he is just making the most outlandish comments that actually make sense, that everybody else is like, he's got the #1 podcast in the world. We can't have him saying that. I think that stuff is great. But Steven Crowder is going to have the ability to, 192 episodes. All right. But then they also went through in that term sheet, they went through, okay, if you get demonetized here, you're going to lose 20% of your income. You get demonetized here, Twitter takes you off. All right. Because we know that when one of these entities goes down cancel culture, most all of them do. So if you did something that has all of this, you're being taken off the air, the company that produces you, the entity that is responsible for hundreds of staff members, maybe thousands. I don't know what the Daily Wire has. I would guess it's in the hundreds. That's a machine that needs to keep going, that needs to keep producing. It's a business. And what I took away from Steven Crowder is that either he didn't care about the business aspect of it, or he's going to blow over it, or he just didn't know. And that's what Tim Pool came out and said. He came out and said, I think Crowder doesn't know how much it takes to produce a show like this. And I don't either. I know how much it takes to produce a show like this that you and I are talking about, and it ain't cheap. It's not cheap. You start looking at all the stuff, you're like, good Lord, is this worth it? And that's what everybody kind of goes through. All right, so should I sell out? That's what everybody's thinking. So from my standpoint, that's why I've gone down the roads that I have. Yeah, is my subscription, growing slowly? Yeah, of course. And we know why. It's not that hard to figure out. So let's do an end route. We're going to go over here. We're going to do that. That's why I'm putting some of my content on, put a lot of it on Rumble, put a lot of it on Discord. You've got to, you talk about, an investment world, you've got to diversify. And so that's essentially what I've done. Not all of your eggs are in one basket. But in order to be able to do that, you've got to have the budget and the ability to make those moves. And these younger content creators, they don't know how to do that. So they could hook up with a Steven Crowder and just go with him. And that is, to me, what he was looking for. He is looking for a younger generation of content creators in the conservative space that he wants to go out there and just roll with. Okay, that's fine. But what I would say there is Steven Crowder hasn't run a business. He probably knows the ins and outs of what the business looks like from the book standpoint, but actually running a business is a wildly different concept, because you either run out of money and the show stops, or you got to borrow, or, you know, you're going to have issues. You're going to have major issues like that. And I was just listening to Gary Vaynerchuk, and he was basically talking about, you know, why most podcasts stop after between 10 and 20 podcasts? Because it's hard. It's hard. And people get to podcast number 20 and go, well, I don't have the success that I want. I'm just going to go back to, you know, doing funny posts on Instagram. We're going to call it good there. It's hard. It's hard doing this. Even getting this podcast, I had to scramble this morning with my guys. One guy's not able to do the thumbnail for this podcast, and, you know, I had to come up with a photo, an image, and put the title and get all this stuff going. Some of that has to do with I haven't done very many live streams. That's what I'm trying to do. But when I record 3 podcasts a day, and I do that consistently, 15 a week, 60 a month. You start doing 60 a month for a few years. I've been doing this since 2020, sometime in 2020. You get better. And I like to think that my show has gotten better. I like to think that my optics have gotten better. I like to think that I have gotten better. But that's also because I'm 54 and I got to take that time frame, which these other kids have had the last 20 years to do. Tim Pool, he's what, 30, call him 35. He's been doing it since he's what, 20? Running around with a cell phone, a jerry-rigged cell phone that had all kinds of batteries and, you know, doing Occupy Wall Street. He's literally just live streaming that. He got his break doing that. Covered it for something like 22 hours. Guy earned his dues. He knows what he's talking about. But then, you know, I've been in real estate, and that's why you guys tune into me, because you're like, well, I don't trust that guy as much. I trust, well, this guy seems like he probably wouldn't 100% lie to me. All right, here are some of my thoughts on when I saw the Steven Crowder thing first. I saw his video, This Must Stop, whatever that was. I saw that, and I was like, the whole business end of what he's talking about doesn't jive with him being screwed by the big conservative movement, whoever that is. Because in the space that I work in, there aren't many big players. You've literally got Fox and a handful of others, but you don't have like this massive system of players that you can look at. So I saw Steven Crowder as maybe talking about something he didn't entirely know. Very passionate about what he's talking about. And he's a funny guy. I think he makes fun of some of the greatest stuff. And I think that he has created a space that is drastically needed, but nobody else does. He's also taken an incredible amount of hits for doing that. When I saw the Ben Shapiro and when I saw the Jeremy Boring, I think it is, the guy that this is all about, the other partner of Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire, I thought, this guy is reading through a contract paragraph by paragraph, explaining why they're doing what they're doing. My bullshit meter didn't go up. It was like, okay, all right, I'm watching this. And then I went back and I looked at Steven Crowder's. This is not saying either one of them is right or wrong. I looked at Steven Crowder's and I was like, all right, he's giving us kind of piecemeal of what we need to know. Whereas this other guy is pretty much disclosing everything without the redacted black, that you do in a contract. And that was not a contract. That was a term sheet, right? So you've got that going on. I watched a bunch of other folks and I like all of these people in this space. I do. I get something from all of them. I understand things that, I should be following other real estate guys, but that's not where I'm at anymore. I'm just no longer doing that. So I got to follow these other guys. And so I looked at the black conservative. I looked at Officer Tatum, I think it was, because those guys can say things that other people can't. Right? I mean, those guys can openly talk about things that we can't. I looked at a handful of other people to get a perspective on what's going on there. And bottom line is I think Steven Crowder's at the end of his contract with the Blaze, and he's looking for, what else is out there. And I think he took this opportunity to try and jumpstart maybe his new entity. And I think it's probably going to backfire on him. And that's unfortunate. But, it's a try for. One of the guys that I was watching said, the guy with Brian Callahan, getting back to that guy, Infotainment, I believe it was, he said, hey, this was a first offer. This was a non-binding offer up sheet. You always come back with a counter. And Crowder came back with a highest and best. He came back with a final. He said, no, give me exactly what you're going to pay me, top dollar. That's all we're doing here. That to me is kind of a dick move because there's back and forth on this stuff. You negotiate this, you negotiate that. Tim Pool talked about that. Ben Shapiro talked about Tim Pool talking about that you have a back and forth and it either works out or it doesn't. We have a lot of deals here at Summit Properties Northwest where I see all the emails go back and forth and people try desperately to get a deal together, mainly the real estate agents, because if it doesn't close, all their work is for naught. But that's just how real estate goes, Independent contractor, you eat what you kill. That's kind of what I love about real estate as well. It's like, well, you sucked it up this month. You made nothing. How's that working out for you? Guess you need to go out and work a little bit harder. That's just how it goes. But Ben Shapiro was talking about, hey, Tim Pool and Daily Wire negotiated back and forth. And at the end of the day, they couldn't get something together. So no harm, no foul. They each went their separate way. And Tim Pool is, he's recognizing, all right, I bring in this many viewers. I have this much ad watch. I have this many hours. I have this many subscriptions. And he has to make an analysis based on that. And the Daily Wire does the same thing on Steven Crowder. All right, he's got this. He's got this. We're doing this. And they got to analyze their downside because otherwise they're just bringing a performer on, a content creator, and they're just paying them a blank check and saying, hey, go for it. We'll take all the risk. You do your thing. We'll take all the risk. And that, unfortunately, is not how business works. It's a negotiation, right? You got it from both sides. So I don't want to sound like unhappy, angry business dude, but if you also look at the players in that field, they're all in their 30s. Are any of them even in their, Dave Rubin's in his 40s, right? I think he's a little bit younger than I am. Joe Rogan, but Joe Rogan will never talk to you about the business other than, hey, if you're independent and you're getting there, I've heard him talk about this with Bill Burr. Don't sell out. Don't take a contract with some other big entity just because they're promising you the world. And that's a lot of what I do as well. It's like, all right, I could probably take News for Reasonable People. I could move it on to a much, much larger entity, but screw that. Why? Why would I want to do that? I'm getting where I need to go, all on my own terms. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it. You know what I mean? People are like, Sean, what's your end goal? I'm like, I don't really know here. What should I do? What do you think I should do? And people are just like, oh my gosh, he doesn't have a game plan. No, I have a game plan. It's just fun to have with people, right? So, the guy with Brian Callahan, he's like, this is a massive offer. And you go back and forth. You go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You might counter 10 different ways and still not come to, might not come to terms. In real estate, it's called, mutual acceptance, MA. And you might not get there. And in that case, no harm, no foul, because you know why? You're probably going to need to work with that person. If you're in real estate long enough, there's only so many players and you don't want to burn a bridge. And so you say, hey, it was nice working with you on this one. I'm so sorry we couldn't get it together. We couldn't get it together for our clients. Love to look forward to, working with you on the next one. And each one goes away thinking, crap, I just lost 22 grand in commission. And, I do the same thing. I'm like, well, I just lost 20% of 22 grand of their commission. It's like, okay, but you're in business long enough. You're going to have those things. So Steven Crowder, I think, didn't quite get or didn't want to get maybe because he's drumming up business for his own entity, whatever that is. So look for Steven Crowder to do something. Don't look for me to do anything other than what I'm already doing. And what am I doing? You can take a peek and see exactly what I'm doing. Here is News for Reasonable People. This is our website. Got our member content over here. This is member content that for one reason or another, and oftentimes it is not obvious. And we've also got, our regular content as well. We've got our latest news. We've got this live stream is on there. You got everything on there that you need. But the main thing that you're going to see here is just stuff that I can't post elsewhere, that I'm not able to, because I will lose the channel. And so often, so $10 a month, it's got some cool content. And I keep saying there's going to be more stuff, but there already is. If you want to go in there and take a look. And I understand that people, oh, wait a minute, I never showed you. You don't really care. But yeah, this is what we've got going. This is the members only section and news for reasonable people. This is all the stuff. We got pages of this. And that's where some of my best content is, as far as what you guys want to hear, but I can't show it elsewhere. It's $10 a month. If you love what I do, if you are flat ass broke and you are on a super thin margin and you really are dying to see what that content looks like, hit me up. Hit me up. We'll work something out. I am not unreasonable. I am old enough where I'm just like, okay, yeah, it'll come back to me. But the majority of players in this field are in their 30s. They are big swinging dicks, and they're at their prime where they're like, I need to get all the money I can because my future. And I was like that when I was their age, but I'm older now, and I'm kind of like, that's a lot of work. And I already got this thing going on over here. So I'm not going to go quite as hard as you guys who are just in the scrum. Just, here's my reaction to Ben Shapiro. Here's my reaction to, whatever. But I find it fascinating. And one of the big takeaways for me is how much information came out of this whole thing. I learned a ton. Since last Friday night, I learned a ton because you won't see those numbers basically brought up elsewhere. You won't see what an actual contract looks like. You won't see what a term sheet looks like. People in mainstream media don't do that. But these guys, I believe, they're putting it out there, not because necessarily they wanted to, but because Steven Crowder kind of forced their hand. And then people are forced to talk about it like, okay, here's the thing. Here's the deal. And that's why it was such a big deal that Elon Musk, champion of free speech, took over, Twitter. Not a huge Twitter fan, but a lot of reporters are, a lot of people who actually report the news. I report my opinion on it. So that's a wildly different thing than what we do. But then I call it news because it reels people in, and that's what we do. Plus it made sense because that way I can cover a whole bunch of extra stuff. So, all right, that is about it for me. I'm going to spend some time here looking. I want to look and see what you guys are talking about over here. I don't have my, see what you guys are saying. People are talking. Yeah. Crowder is Canadian. He is Canadian, isn't he? Things are a little different, aren't they? But does he live down in Dallas? I think he does. Austin, maybe. Everybody's either in Texas or, I gotta move this bad boy over here. Sorry, folks. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I wasn't able to see what you guys are talking about. I'm just going to go through here. I will read some comments. We'll talk about it and see. We got, soldiers for Soros. That's true. God bless America. Yep. All right. The chat is not for reasonable people today. Enjoy sniffing each other. Bye. Okay. We got some angry folks in there. And Hunter offers the free cat crack pipe as well. What's not to like? All right. Mercury, were you out of control? Maybe so. Who knows? If only they were chanting to hang Mike Pence, everything would have been fine. Yeah. See, almost comment like that can get you taken down. So that kind of looks at, he sniffs at your private parts like a dog. That's not good. We can't have that. But he does, doesn't he? Talking about our fine, fearless president. We'll skip down to the end. Right-wing Nazi channel. Crowder, Shapiro, Beck, Alex, all egomaniacs. They really are, aren't they? They really are. And you know what? Most real estate guys are as well. They really are. They're massive egomaniacs. And it's because that's how they get everybody to do their bidding. And when you run a show that big, you don't want to be, the reasonable, understanding, care guy. You got to be just drop the hammer. That's where I don't really fit into that, because I'm not really the big, huge egomaniac. I get on here and kind of talk about my own thing. Somebody says Crowder taped his own guy. Kind of sneaky. He taped the guy from, he taped the guy he got the contract from, is who he taped. He taped a personal conversation that he had, and then, basically released that. Not good. No dual citizen in government, natural only, like our food. All right. From what I understand, both sides, Crowder would have to produce those 190 some odd episodes on his own dime. No, they were covering the entire cost. And so Crowder was basically getting paid $75 million over 6 years if he took that extended contract. And that is why, from my understanding, from Jeremy Boring, that is why they had the clauses in his contract where they're saying, hey, if the company makes less money, you're going to make less money. Because if you make a mistake and you get caught, something happens, we'll defend you to the best of our ability. But the bottom line is, if you pull some stunt and you basically get demonetized or you get ixnayed, then Daily Wire is saying, here is how this is going to impact you. And Steven Crowder took that as, hey, they don't want me to say certain things because I'll get demonetized. He is already doing that, just like I did, by saying, hey, I can't really talk about some of this stuff, but over here I can. On reasonabletv.com, that's where I can. And that's where I am doing it. So we all know that we're being censored. It's how smart do you do it in a way that you do it. And with Steven Crowder, unfortunately, his whole shtick is tied up in that really kind of, that humor, right? That humor that some people take as not being reasonable. Let's see what else we've got here. Crowder taped his own guy. That was brutal. So red pill or blue pill, Mr. Anderson. Okay. Most all of this Canadian or dual citizenship in media and government. He's quite the dick for being Canadian. He is quite the dick for being a Canadian. And I think that's part of what makes him funny. I like the guy, but he also, because he puts himself out there, but he also takes some risks. And I think this is one of those risks that maybe went sideways on him. I think this is a big swinging dick in your 30s, you're maybe mid to late 30s, and you don't understand the consequences for how that's going to look down the road. Whereas an older guy would go, okay, I could probably get XYZ number of people to follow me, but is it worth it? Maybe I just hunker down, do my own thing. And that's kind of what I always come down to at the end of the day is hunker down, do your own thing, let all of this just go past you. And then, you're left standing when a whole bunch of other guys have gone by the wayside and you're like, I'm still here. Look at me go. That's kind of where I want to be. All right. That's about it for, 75 million over 6 years. So 50 million for 4 years, 25 million for 2 years, and 192 episodes per year. And they gave him the ability, if he needed time off, he could go do whatever he wanted. And you guys are getting into a bunch of stuff, kind of crazy stuff there. And there will be no second offer. Yeah, might not be. Probably won't be. That's probably absolutely correct. All right, that's it for me. But I'm trying to do a bunch of live streams. That's what we're doing. Makes it more of a live show. Thank you so much for being here. I'll catch up with you in the next one. Thanks again. Bye for now.